Lots of criticisms of the lawyers. I think the lawyers really have a lot to answer for. It's the government for changing what should be a system driven by human values into one driven by numbers. And all the targeting system, the performance indicators, and Ofsted, I picked it up recently. Ofsted said Birmingham was inadequate because we had too many children in care and too few adoptions from care. Now, I thought we got rid of the adoption targets, and it turns out we got rid of the adoption target BV163, but not the adoption target PAFC23. And Ofsted are going around saying to people, you've got to have more adoptions from care. Now, they get the figures wrong, because they ignore all the Section 20 kids that are there. And so, because you never get the Section 20 kids adopted, because very often its parents can't cope with them and put them in care on accommodation orders. And so, in theory, they're trying to get these kids adopted, which you can never do. So they drive for the younger children, because they tend to be more readily adopted. And you can see it in all the statistics, and anyone who wants a copy, a lot of them are on the website, and I can put more of the copies of the statistics out. But it is important that people recognise that there is good practice and bad practice in this area. There are good lawyers and bad lawyers, although I only know a few lawyers I would trust, which is slightly different. I would trust more social workers as a proportion of the whole than I would trust lawyers. There are good social workers and bad social workers, and it is wrong to demonise all the social workers, as the Sun has been doing recently, because there is good practice and bad practice, but the system encourages bad practice. It creates an environment where the managers who deliver the numbers do so by bullying people and forcing people to do things that are wrong and that they know are wrong, which is why people leave the job, because they hate doing it. Right? And so why you can't get a lot of English social workers is the people forced to remove children that they don't want to remove walk. Right? And that's the be all and end all of it. But the difficulty of fighting it is getting the recognition that it's broken in the first instance.
I mean,
I know.
I mean, the
actions in the long term, hence the longevity in their work doesn't really last. It's got a pretty high staff turnover.
No, exactly. But it causes loads of stress.
I mean, the most famous one recently is the Baby P case. Harrogate Social Services sent out emails asking to borrow social workers because they had no social workers. And okay, they try and blame that on why Baby P died, but again, it's because the good ones had had enough of the corrupt system and left them in the lurch.
I just wanted to say something, and I don't know if you've read the Daily Mail today.
That's a case about the failure to. This is the one about the foster child abusing
was
children.
raped and
Yes, that's right.
And local authorities didn't give the
Didn't tell the foster parents. Yeah, that sort of thing happens as well. We've got cases similar to that in Birmingham. Not as extreme as that, but there is. I know of a similar case in Birmingham.
But getting back to this adoption thing, adoption laws are just so clear and final. And in the Baby P case and a lot of other cases, they just cannot reverse it.
Well, it's the Webster case you're thinking of particularly.
But it's the Webster.
The odd thing about the Webster judgment, and I don't want to go into the question of what should happen about adoption, etc. I think the big problem is having the forced adoption in the first instance, and how you deal with a forced adoption that's a miscarriage of justice, frankly, is not an issue in my view for the courts to deal with. It's an issue for the adoptive parents, who are victims of this as much as the birth parents. The problem is that there's this conflict created between two sets of parents, and in fact, if you look at the Webster case, there are now 4 people, 2 sets of parents, who know that the children they shouldn't have, right? And what's that for them? That's not good for them. They are victims of the system just as much as the Webster parents and the 5 children, as they will be soon. The odd thing which was new to me in the Webster judgment, in fact, was that there have been adoptions that have been reversed. All right, in England, and I thought there was one that came close in Scotland, but what didn't actually happen. But in England, there have been at least one adoption that was reversed, and I thought there never had been any. So they can't actually say they never do. But I think one of the difficulties you face is you face a situation where large numbers of children have been wrongfully adopted, but they are now with adoptive parents, although some of the adoptions have been disrupted or have failed, and the children have gone back into care.
John, is that case in your
Sorry? It's in the Webster judgment. So just look at you've got the way. Well, do you want to talk a bit, and I'll find it.
Talk about where we're up to.
I was talking about adoption.
Well, again, another
failed adoption.
Another factor of the Webster case was a second opinion would have changed the entire case. Appointing a separate expert rather than just, you know, the judge is accepting the first expert. Well, this expert is an expert and he must be right. The judges are now saying, well, if you've got a different expert, we'd have had a different outcome and probably the children wouldn't have been adopted.
But am I correct? The experts have to be acceptable to the local authority.
Yeah, I know that's a big problem.
Yes.
Yeah. So they do have a rather stranglehold on trying to control that, don't they?
You'll find you can actually challenge it very well if you it's again if you're a litigant in person and doing your own case. You will get sent experts all the time. Especially in your own case, you might have a list of 3 or 4 you can choose. I mean, in some cases it's not been, well, common practice, but they do, and they should have 3 experts for you personally to choose one from. Now, local authorities always put forward the ones who would favour the local authority. I've found that in pretty much every case I've had. And it's very difficult when the local authority know the expert's going to favour them. Your parents or your client, he's just got no chance, and this is where second opinions come into.
Second opinions,
and you can actually go for a second
They
opinion.
don't seem to encourage second opinion.
No, of course they don't. They want the full certainty. The judges want to feel that they want a very rapid result where they know what the answer is, and that's achieved by not having conflicting opinions. A good example for this is shaken baby syndrome. Recently, there has been evidence. The shaken baby syndrome is the theory behind it is that if you've got subdural hematomae, retinal hemorrhages, and hypoxic encephalopathy, which is basically damage to the brain from a shortage of oxygen. Yeah, that's retinal hemorrhages. Then that means that a baby has been shaken. Now, it was found with the in America with the Amish that they had a genetic flaw which causes glutaric aciduria. Yeah, but most importantly, firstly, it's known that there are certain circumstances on which this happens, and you have a genetic cause. Most importantly, recently research, well, it's not really research, it's clinical reports from Barts have identified that you can, in children up to 2 months old, these things happen naturally, not necessarily the hypoxic encephalopathy, but the other 2 things, the bleeding in behind the eyes and the bleeding just under the brain surface. And that's quite important to a number of cases where children have been removed with the argument being that they had to have been hurt. But in fact, it's because there's full certainty. And the judges want the full certainty because they don't want to think that, in fact, a lot of what they've relied on in the family courts is complete rubbish. But sadly it is. And that's one of the problems we face. But the European Court believes there should be a second opinion. And there's a case Ex v Croatia, which is an interesting case to look at, which also looks at the mental capacity issue. And there, they did have a second opinion. So the European Court was comfortable that there was a second opinion. And at some stage, the sort of inertia of the judicial establishment here in believing that having only one medical opinion is enough will come up against the European Court saying it's not enough.
The recent case where there's been a second opinion, I'm not going to mention which case it was.
Yes.
There's also a third opinion coming through from a different doctor as well.
Oh, is that? Yeah, that's quite good. Yeah.
You know which case.
I know which case you're talking about, and obviously that one's going to the Court of Appeal at the moment.
Yes.
Who probably will bounce it, but then we will take it on from the Court of Appeal to the European Court, and this time we will get everything right. So that the European Court again, the point is the more cases we take to the European Court asking for urgent proceedings, the greater chance interim proceedings, with the greater